Hi all, I have another fascinating game. This is submitted by Gallagher on the Leela Chess forums. Xiphos, which I believe is the name of a sword, an ancient kind of sword, was playing with 4-core i7, and Leela Chess 520, quite a high D, was playing on a 1080 graphics card, which is they're really coming down in price. So the self-learning neural networks love the graphic cards. So let's see this game. d4 from Xiphos, 0.3. We have g6, knight 3, bishop g7. This is the last book move, so they're starting from this position. e4, d6. We have Pirc's defense, basically. Both sides castle. Knight c6, d5. So Leela is encouraging some dark square weaknesses potentially, but white has that space edge. The knight just goes back. h3, e5, so it's got a king's engine field to it, except the c-pawn's here behind the knight. But some characteristics of the king's engine are evident. Bishop g5, h6, bishop drops back. So e3, knight bd7, knight d2, knight h7. Standard stuff so far. It looks like smooth attacking chess that you'd expect, and without the concern about the pawn structure being damaged with c4, c5 so quickly here, because of that lovely knight on c3 from black's perspective. So we have a4, a5, knight b3. Now a curious move, knight g5 in fact, queen d2, and it gets even more curious now, and I don't know if this can be considered even a new strategy for the position. What I am aware of is I once had an over-the-board game against a very strong 200-plus player where I kind of lost the dark square bishop with white, and it was very unpleasant after that, because you can see some pawns are on light squares, and if you lose the dark square bishop, positioning sometimes it's not desirable, especially if you have a pawn on c4 though. But here it seems Leela's encouraging this concept with this next move, which is actually a bit of a shocker though. Even with the pawn on c2, there's these two pawns. Is white really that weak on dark squares? Leela plays a bit of a shocker. Well, if you can guess it, that'd be fun. If I give you another 2 seconds. Okay, knight f6. I can see that there's a little bit of positional compensation intuitively. And King's Engine players love to celebrate the dark squares. Sometimes there have been some fantastic games by Kasparov where he's even sacked his queen to get a dark square domination, great pieces on dark squares. But is this justified here? If white doesn't take on g5, sorry, after knight f6, if white doesn't take on g5 and plays, say, f3, black protects then the g5 knight with the queen as well. And this is really quite nice position to have for black. This kind of position is really quite nice. So white did take that on g5. We have hg, queen takes g5, king h7. Now it's played. So does black have enough? Well, with king h7, bishop h6, now this diagonal can be taken over. Is that a bad sign for white? Queen g3, bishop h6. It now means bishop f4 is also on the cards, potentially. Rook fe1. We have b6. Rook ad1. King g7. This implies actually that rook h8 and this h file could also be in the short term of interest. Now we have queen d3. So in programming terms, I mean, I think there's more programming since I first started the YouTube channel. It seems as though in chess we're kind of forcing unstructured programming to the opponents. Like forcing moves are like go-tos. So the opponent's plodding along and you have a load of forcing moves and they end up in lost position. They wonder how do they get from one position to another. It's like running a go-to statement. But here, this pawn sacrifice, I think it's like inflicting a global variable. Because globally, whatever white does, whatever transactions happen now, there's an echo of dark square weaknesses. And this could pervade short-term and long-term. Let's see rook h8. In the short term, there's things like bishop f4 on the dark squares. And in the short term, this h-file pressure is also a big concern. Knight b5, we have bishop f4. So there's dark square pressure. The bishops are clearly pointing at the king. We have another case, it's starting to look visually crushing already, but the proof is in the pudding. Bishop f1 puts up a solid defense to the h3 pawn. Now Leela actually plays bishop g4. White dare not take this, so it's hitting the rook. If white takes this, then check. This is just a mating pattern. Bishop g3 check, rook h1 check, and the queen can swing over via h8 to deliver a checkmate. So after bishop g4, we have rook a1. And now black builds up, rook h6 potentially on that h file. Queen c3, very elegant stuff. Queen h8, forgetting about c7. Black is seemingly got something nasty going on there. But exactly what? White plays knight c1. If knight takes c7, then there are fireworks. And it turns out there are two moves here which are really good. Either pinning the knight, or even this, direct assault. Because in this position, with the pin delayed even, there's a key idea, not just sacking them, but rook takes. And now a key idea here, which is subtle and lethal. I'm not sure even I could find it myself. It's queen h4, just eyeing this soft spot, gently eyeing this soft spot as well. And it's fatal. Because if white ever plays rook e2, it sort of damages a king escape route. So I'll give you an example. Rook ad1, knight g4. If rook e2, then there's bang, rook h1 check, and you can see the escape route of the king has been damaged by rook e2. So queen h4 is a bit of a subtle thing for knight g4 to encourage the king to be trapped by its own rook. A bit of a subtle attacking move to bear in mind. Now here, instead of rook d2, I mean, what about if rook d2? We just take that, and then that's checkmate as well. So yeah, it's all pretty dangerous here on taking on c7, as you might have expected. But okay, so we have actually knight c1 being played. Still, it looks like an awesome attacking position at the moment. Now here we have rook c8 actually defending that now. Knight d3. g5, f3, bishop d7. So white is weaker now on those dark squares even more with this f3 move. As I say, this is like inflicting a global long-running weakness in white's position is on the dark squares. You might wonder how long-running is this dark square thing. It's like setting a global flag against white, basically, which traditional chess engines just don't really get. This long-term compensation here. After rook g8, we have knight takes f4, g takes, king f2. Now it looks as though the king is actually escaping here. So rook g6, king e2. The king's making its way out of danger. You might wonder, hold on a sec. So we've had a twist like this before in at least one game example. The king's escaped, and then it's been connected past pawns which take over. What's taking over here? There's no connected past pawns. Is there a plan B? I'll tell you the plan B. The plan B is that these dark squares are really weak. That's the clue. What can use the dark squares in the endgame? I'll let you ponder that. Knight e8, knight b5. Black took on b5, transitioning to an endgame here. So it's a light square bishop and a knight here. Queen drops back. The king escapes even further. Now the knight makes itself cozy on c5 with this maneuver, which the dark square bishop doesn't really have any say in, because it's on the other colour and can never jump on dark square, so it has no say in the matter. So b4 trying to have a say in the matter, but that's just taken. The knight installs itself on c5, and it loves closed positions like this and nice outposts. Queen d7, rook a7, and now rook g3. So there's a threat here. It looks as though there's a threat potentially of knight takes c4, but the thing is c7. There's c7 pressure, so that's not on at the moment. So we have rook c8, and now this might be on knight takes e4 with that pinned pawn on f3. So the queen goes to c4. Now we have king h6, rook a8. Now black is not minding this at all, potentially, this transition to an endgame. And you might wonder why. Okay, rook takes, rook takes. So white is a pawn up, right? So endings are fine, or are they? The queen is infiltrating though via f2 now, but white uses the opportunity to try and swap off. Black obliges. So what's going on here? What about these dark squares? Well, it's echoed here by king h5. The king is trying to make a charge into the position via the dark squares now. This is just an absolute classic position of a fantastic knight against a bad bishop. This pawn locks down white's pawn structure. So even though black is a pawn down, this looks as though it's strategically very dodgy, if not totally lost for white. Rook a7, king h4, c4, king g3. The king's going to get into the position. White tries to be stubborn to stop the king going to f2, but now the king pops in at h2. It doesn't matter about the discovered check here. We see king c3. If we try to discover check, then king g3 and job done. How is f3 defended here? For example, this. Then actually strongest is rook h8. See this? This is really bad for white. This kind of continuation. Knight takes e4 check. And it's not very good at all for white in this position. So rook a2, the king just uses so the king comes to h2, not fearing the discovered check. We have king c3, king g1, rook a1, king f2. So the king's made it to f2 onto that dark square. And in fact now, white relinquishes the a file with rook d1, tied up, kind of almost like zugzwang position here. If the king moves there, there's knight b3. This knight's making itself felt all the time as well. So here we have rook d1, rook a8, king d2, knight d7. Where's the knight going? Where's this naughty knight going? We're going to find out. Knight f6, knight h5. The knight's coming into g3. And here, again, white's kind of tied up in knots. It's very difficult to move anything. We have bishop c2, which allows, unfortunately, this weakness of the last move for the knight to hop in to a central dark square, which, again, the bishop can't do a thing about. So black is optimizing the pieces now, remaining pieces. King c1. And now, Leela just cashes out into the endgame. Just snaps on c2 to take on g2, undermining f3. And the h pawn is dropping, and with that the f3 pawn is now going to be the next target after king f2, rook a3, rook h3. Yep, with f3 dropping, now we've got a big passed pawn, which is quicker than any of white's passed pawns. We've got two connected passed pawns, in fact, coming up. c5 desperate, that's taken. Two connected passed pawns. So 3 connected passed pawns, and it's kind of adjudicated here. White resigns. In effect, this position obviously is absolutely crushing. It's like, if you're a programmer, you'll know what I mean. A global variable was set early on in this game after knight g5. That pawn sacrifice damaged white on the dark squares. For anything that happened after, short term, long term, didn't matter about the king attack not working, that there was no connected passed pawns like we've seen in another example. This is plan B, king infiltration on dark squares. Plan B, yeah, it's justified by the whole, what triggered this off, this weakness was early on, the pawn sacrifice. It's profound. This pawn sacrifice early on weakened white on the dark squares. And as many over-the-board players have experienced, sometimes you get these endgames where you can dominate on dark squares later, especially in King's Indian style positions or Philidor defense style positions. White can often be very weak on the dark squares later in endgames. So it's beautiful to see white just totally tied up without any counterplay. the bishop is just sometimes a very, very sad piece when faced with such a clever, tricky knight, which can just improve itself, basically, and the bishop can't. It's just sitting there like a spectator, watching the dark squares helplessly. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as me. Comments, questions, like, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.